We have a guest joining us in the studio today, and he is the, I guess they call him vice president or vice chairman,
Vice Chairman, yep,
vice chairman of the Idaho Beef Council.
correct.
Bill Likely. Bill, we'll have you move the microphone over just a little bit more.
All right.
But first of all, thanks for coming by today. I know this was on short notice. I actually, uh, somebody with a very similar name to yours, was mentioning this to her yesterday, and we were talking about this subject, and she said, "Yeah, this is getting to be a tremendously big issue. What we're talking about is really what will be a continued assault on the beef industry, and especially in places like Idaho where it's so important." And she suggested that you could come in today because she had a breakfast appointment, and so uh, you're pinch hitting today.
Well, second's better than
Yeah, well,
last, I guess.
I was going to say your role on the Beef Council though gives you a seat where you probably have more of an insight to this than anybody else in southern Idaho. And a couple of the things we were talking about, maybe we'll start from the backward end of it because I had started this conversation because of what's taking place in some countries in Europe with beef taxes and some of the other things that we're hearing about in the United Nations talking about curbing the growth of just the growth of the beef industry and how much beef people eat. But then Steve Millington was here yesterday, and we got into the discussion about the latest numbers on sage grouse, and they're down 52% over 3 years. Now this could be an anomaly, but Steve said the first place they're going to point the finger at are grazing cattle, and yet he said it's actually probably the cattle that are helping keep those numbers where they're at this point. And uh, your take would probably be similar on that.
Yeah, I agree. I think for some reason the lowly bovine has become an easy target for many interests around the country and around the world, and it's a little bit perplexing why that is. We view, and I think have plenty of scientific research to back up the beef cow properly managed is a great tool, um, not only to manage rangelands for fire prevention, improving uh, plant cultures, uh, diversity, but also converting, we call it upcycling forages and byproducts of, for instance, our potato industry here in the Magic Valley, the sugar beet industry, upcycling that uh, forage and other byproducts into the best quality protein in the world. And as you look around the world, um, protein is near and dear and a expensive and difficult um, part of the diet in the developing world. And so I think as Europe and more in the United States, as they try to put the cow out of the food chain, I think the people that are really going to suffer are those people that are trying to lift themselves out of poverty with it and create a better, higher quality diet.
I read, oh, many years ago, a scientific paper somebody just dropped on my desk, and it said that some scientists believe that human beings uh, are the way we are today because of the protein that we had in our diets. That that allowed our heads to grow larger and our brains to grow larger, and that and then we could do a lot more with our dexterous hands than just pick leaves off trees, and that created what we might call modern civilization. So without protein in the diet, my question is, do we suddenly lose all of that? Is that the future? And that's what concerns me. And I don't think people ask those questions. They just look and say, "Oh, there's flatulence. We got to get rid of this."
Yeah, exactly. And I look at uh, the the ruminant stomach for. I mean, they can convert so many things that humans can't eat or takes a lot of energy to convert into edible food, and the cow can just do it naturally, turn it into very dense protein. If you look at development of civilization, the human being has been able to go from spending all their waking hours trying to get food and prepare food and make it edible to a very small portion of not only their time but also their pocketbook and spend the rest of their time creating other good for civilization. And I think that's something we should celebrate rather than demonize.
You know, and your family has been in ranching for generations, as I understand it. The other aspect I think people overlook when they talk about this is that generation after generation, there's a family bond that gets built. There's a tradition that gets built. It's a healthy lifestyle, and the people who are involved in it, they grow up and they're well-adjusted human beings. They're not the human beings we hear about all the time in the news who had troubles growing up and spent too much time in front of screens and doing all of those things. So that it's a more traditional lifestyle that raises people up to be better citizens in the long run.
I agree. I think if you look at a lot of our leadership in the Idaho State House, a lot of those people came from
Hmm.
ranching and farming backgrounds, and that's not by accident. They were self-reliant. They had to figure out how to solve problems on their own and not look for somebody else to do it for them. Um, I, I I think we always um, view the in the livestock industry for a young person to see birth and growth and death as a natural thing and understand how that is and our responsibilities as caretakers of animals and the land and also that idea that you're just caretaking that for in preparation for the next generation. It's not something that you um, use up and it's gone when you're gone. So
I was chuckling. I was visiting the county museum up in Payette County a few weeks ago, and one of the directors was talking with me, and we got talking about kids who play video games. They don't come to her museum, she said, any longer. They play video games. And she said, and yet you see a kid, he wins $3 million playing a video game. And I thought, well, that's true, but he's really a rarity. On the other hand, kids who aren't playing video games and maybe growing up on a farm or a ranch, uh, every year we go to the fair and we see them there with their animals. They're showing their animals. And they have learned sometimes at very young ages a responsibility that a lot of people don't have at 30.
yeah, I agree, and I think a challenge for rural America for the um, farming and ranching industry is to um, the the secret's out. Those are the kids that will succeed and do great things in whatever endeavor they go to once they leave the farm, grow up and leave. And I think there's sort of been a drain off of out of rural America and out of agriculture because those kids get bit away from farming and ranching. And so we work very hard and think about that a lot is how do we provide opportunities for those young people to come back into agriculture, come back into our rural communities and continue the great success we've had in the past.
I want to play something for you. This is about a little over 2 minutes long. And this was where this idea got percolating in my head the other day. Mark Stein interviewing a woman on Fox News Channel, and he's talking about some of these beef taxes around the world, and she's from PETA. And again, this is about 2 minutes long, but I want to share this and maybe get your reaction to it.
In Germany, lawmakers have introduced a bill that would increase a 19% value added tax to all the meat in the country. And in the United Kingdom, Goldsmiths University in London has banned all beef, all burgers entirely in the name of the planet. Make no mistake, there are people who want to do the same thing in America until we all have to get our protein by eating mealworms and grasshoppers. I love a grasshopper à l'orange this time in the evening. Ashley Byrne is Associate Director of PETA. She joins us. Now, PETA actually is in favor of a meat tax, is that correct?
Well, PETA has been an advocate for a meat tax for many years because of the fact that we already have similar taxes on products like soda, cigarettes, and alcohol for their effect on human health. And we have a similar tax on products that are harmful to the environment. So when you look at the fact that the meat industry, that meat consumption is a top contributor to the diseases killing Americans, like heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and stroke. And it's one of the primary culprits behind every major environmental concern, whether you're talking about climate change water pollution, air pollution, or deforestation, we think we should be following a similar path for
Well,
meat.
is that the case? I mean, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez obviously went very big when she launched the Green New Deal on the bovine flatulence, but you don't actually. That doesn't apply to all animals. There was a survey at the University of Waterloo in Canada, for example, that suggested that using pig methane, you could actually use that as fuel, and it would be, in fact, more environmentally friendly than, say, natural gas.
Well, if we want to get a real picture of the environmental impact of the meat and animal agriculture industry as a whole, we need to look beyond the methane and beyond climate change.
Oh, I don't know what that last part means, beyond methane and beyond climate change. It just probably sounds good to her. And I don't know that you're willing to trade in beef farming for grasshopper farming at this point. But this just shows you just how entrenched some of these people are in their beliefs.
Absolutely. I don't think she mentioned that Jimmy Hoffa was buried under a feedlot in Nebraska, but that's one more thing we're blamed for. But no, I guess where to begin. I would argue, and scientific research has shown that beef can be very much a part of a healthy diet. There's absolutely no parallels to beef and cigarettes or soda pop, that kind of thing. Obviously, people need to make good choices about what they eat and the quantities they eat and exercise and everything else. So, that's research would dispel that. From an environmental standpoint, again, I think there's a lot more positive that can be accomplished with livestock that we are just beginning to see now. They talk about carbon sequestration. You know, the properly managed grazing operation can sequester carbon and be a net contributor to lowering CO2 levels if that's what the planet needs. And so I think we really need to pivot this conversation to, you know, what additional benefits can livestock production bring to civilization and the country as a whole. And there's plenty of people out there doing some really fabulous things on their own ranches. There's lots of research going on as far as that goes. And so can we do better? We can always do better. And I think that's the success of this United States and the capitalistic system, is that as long as the bureaucracy doesn't cloud the supply demand impacts, I think good things happen and values are raised, and we can make it a better place, better world to live in.
We've got more coming up with Bill Likely. He's going to be with us a bit longer this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And by the way, if you've got a comment or question for him, hold on to that. We've got a short break on the way, but you can ask that after the break at 208-736-0300. That's 208-736-0300. And I do want to point out as well that you can drop me questions by email, of course, at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. Sometimes, though, trying to type all of that out, it's easier to pick up the telephone and actually make the telephone call in that situation. It's 9:20, and we're at 68 already on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And you're listening to Magic Valley this morning. And Mr. Likely is the vice chairman of the Idaho Beef Council. Again, he's going to be with us a bit longer this morning. Wanted to mention we've got a guest joining us in the studio this morning, and Bill Likely is here from the Idaho Beef Council. He is the vice chairman. It's at 9:22. Bill Colley as well on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Thanks for joining us on Magic Valley this morning. It's 68, and we have a caller directly out of the break. And caller, you're on the air with Bill Likely. Go ahead.
Hey, I think you can come up with some real good ideas on. Most farmers have cow manure spreaders, and that cow manure builds up the soil so we get more and better food.
I guess he's talking just about, the use of the fertilizer, but that's already As I understand it, that's so regulated now, you have to have acreage to match the number of cattle you often have, right?
Yeah, especially in the confined animal feeding operations, there's a nutrient management plan, and it is definitely monitored and regulated. For the history of livestock, I think humans have figured out that manure it cycles back into the soil and grows more crops, and so it's a continual cycling of nutrients. And I think the industry's over time is getting better at making that a better product to put on the crops and to distribute it in the best places possible. So yeah, and as Mark was talking on the Fox News segment, the methane energy um, program is catching on around the country and around the world, and I
Hmm.
think that's going to be a real positive for.
Some ranches may be running off their own power because of this in a few years.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. You know, technology continues to evolve to bring the cost down of getting those set up, and I think over time that's certainly a win-win.
We've got another caller. And caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX. Go ahead.
Good morning, gentlemen. I think it's a misnomer from all these people that on the left screaming and yelling. The farmer doesn't do anything that he thinks is going to kill his business. He tries to improve it. And for every cow out there, we grow more crops to feed that cow. It creates more oxygen than anything else. And these people that keep screaming about cows, where do they live? In a city. Why are they always looking in to blame someone else when they're not even cleaning up their own backyard? They obviously have more flatulence and screaming and yelling, putting out more carbon monoxide out of their mouth and driving their cars because their cities are polluted. So clean up your own mess, and then when you do that, then come tell us how to do it.
I want to thank the caller for chiming in. Any thoughts?
I think couldn't agree more. The water cycle. If you look at the water cycle, all these areas covered with asphalt and concrete certainly don't cycle water through the system as nature developed. And then I guess just the other point I talked about, farmers and ranchers certainly don't do anything to harm themselves on purpose economically, but they're also looking to uh, make their world, their environment, the farm and ranch they live on, better place to live for themselves and their family. So as a result, that certainly helps neighbors and other people in the community.
I was going to say, though, you think about it, you do a better job managing the manure than they do in San Francisco.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for all the talk, you could probably walk around a good part of your ranch and still your boots would be clean by the end of the day.
Absolutely.
The other thing too, you talk about what a lot of the folks who make the most noise don't realize. I was just out for a drive the other day along Route 75, um, and I think the week before that, I was all the way up in the area around Notice, and some of the back roads, and I every time I go by pivots now, I see these little arrays. It's sometimes solar power arrays that are also being integrated into all of this, and they're not massive, but they're part of the system. And so more and more there's just this branching out, this thought into all of this process, and I don't think that a lot of the critics realize that these efforts have been underway for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think if we allow um, resources to be priced in the free market, then as energy becomes more dear, then technology steps in and figures out a cheaper way to deliver it, and that creates conservation because obviously wasting a resource with a value to it is not economically wise uh, or sustainable.
And you had mentioned, we're talking about the methane capture earlier. 20 some years ago, I remember I was on a dairy farm and seeing a digester, and the farm owner was telling me about some of the energy he was getting out of that, and so it was good use, a good way to recycle some material and save some money
Yeah.
in the long run. but we're looking at more and more of those uses. And in the last hour of the program, we were talking about alternative energies, and we sometimes think it's all just wind and solar, but methane in some places around the world is a huge. There's a city of about 80,000 people in Sweden, as I understand it. It's all being lighted off. All the light is coming from methane.
Yeah.
It's not impossible to do.
Yeah. Well, and I'd kind of, I'd also go back to my earlier comments on the potato byproduct industry. Let's say that livestock wasn't available to feed the peels and so forth that are left after they make French fries and so forth. So you take all that byproduct, haul it to the landfill, it will create methane. So um, the livestock provide way better value to that product and create very high quality protein, and the methane can be managed in a much more a lot better way.
We got to take another short break. Can you stick around a few more minutes?
You bet.
I know you're a busy guy, but you have a much longer workday than most of us. So we want to thank you for coming in, by the way. And again, we mentioned Bill is here on short notice. Bill likely joining us from the Idaho Beef Council. We're at 9:29, and the temperature is at 69. And we've got a short break coming up. And Bill Colley with you too on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Likely is the vice chairman of the Idaho Beef Council, joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And it's not an unfamiliar position to him, in the sense that you've got people, environmentalists, and you've got some people in government, and you got people internationally, not only just in this country, who are always attacking the beef industry. It's been going on for decades now, but lately some of these attacks have been stepped up just a bit. It's 9:34, and we're at 71. Bill Colley as well on Magic Valley this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And we've got a caller with us. And caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX.
Well, last week I listened to a CBS News radio report at the top of the hour on a radio program here in the Valley. And what they had said about the beef industry and the farming industry, and how they said that farming was unsustainable and eating beef was something, well, I guess you could say they called it unsustainable too, because, you can't eat beef because, it's causing global warming. And so I guess recently in a Eastern university or something or somewhere, they're, they say you can't even eat beef on the campus or something. And see, these people, if they get their way, they will destroy the economy of America, and the world will starve. And God forbid they get their way. Oregon, Washington, and California are doing things right now to ag that is very unsettling, and they're coming our way. I'll hang up.
I think that's always the constant worry in Idaho, is that we'll see that change eventually afflict us politically, and that will. I mean, after all, Oregon just decided that you can't buy eggs unless it's from free-range chicken. Mandating that is going to put a lot of people out of business. It's going to mean there's going to be fewer eggs, and there's going to be more expensive eggs, and all over. I mean, the agricultural industry, you're seeing those pressures.
Absolutely, and I could just go 100 different directions with this, but one thing I think about a lot is, the people that are in favor of free range eggs and so forth are willing and able to pay 25-50% more for eggs, and are fine with everybody having to pay that. Well, what about the little kid in Detroit, Michigan, or the little kid in Boise that parents are just scraping by? He doesn't care about free range chickens. He's hungry, and in order to grow up healthy, to develop cognitively, he needs protein in his diet. And if we price all of this high quality protein out of the budget of our young families, their kids will suffer for it. And we talked, it is possible to take a vegan meal and balance it perfectly, adding some vitamins and so forth. Number one, people don't have the time or
Hmm.
ability to do that, and two, that becomes very expensive as well. So while we get before we get too high and mighty on how we think our food should be raised, I think we need to think about that kid in downtown Milwaukee, Wisconsin, that just goes home hungry.
Wanted to mention again, telephone number if you'd like to reach the program is 208-736-0300. And Bill Likely joining us this morning on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX with Bill Colley. And Bill is actually the vice chairman of the Idaho Beef Council, and that gives him a window into all of this. We've got about a minute before the next break. Before we get there, sometimes I watched a TV show not long ago about a guy from Scotland who was opposed to guns, and they brought this guy over to the United States as part of an exchange program, and they took him to a range and showed him what it was like. And initially, he said it didn't change his mind, but he thought about this for a couple of weeks, and it started to change his mind about these issues. I wonder if you could do the same thing with these environmentalists, where you bring them out to the ranch. Maybe it's done in some programs sometimes. And a similar idea to allow them to see what happens, how it works, what goes on, and maybe it'll change some of their minds.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the Idaho Beef Council is, and beef councils around the country have worked very hard to improve communication and bring teachers and healthcare professionals and other media people out to the ranch, to the feedlot, to the packing houses. Been very open and transparent about what we do and why we do it. The impact to those people has been very dramatic, and the challenge we have is, as a very small number of producers out here in the country, is somehow getting that message and getting that interaction dispersed among the huge population of urban people we have.
Got more coming up with Bill Likely, vice chairman of the Idaho Beef Council. It is 9:40, and we're at 70 on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you too until 10 a.m. Bill Likely is the vice chairman of the Idaho Beef Council. He is joining us until 10 o'clock this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you, and I'm handling the telephones at 208-736-0300. 208-736-0300. We're coming up on 9:44. And also you can reach me at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. That's bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. Got a point we were talking about during one of the breaks earlier, and we haven't shared this on the air, but I remember reading that during the 1920s, people started realizing that Americans were growing at a rate, height-wise, faster than European counterparts. And by the time we got to World War II, when our troops started arriving in Europe, they were on average a couple of inches taller than the English and the Frenchmen that they were often, serving alongside. And it was determined at the time it was because there was so much beef in the U.S. diet, and so you had these big, tall, and on the battlefield sometimes. I remember hearing stories. James Arness he was close to 7 feet tall, and he was a farm boy from Minnesota. That they used him because of his height. When they got to Anzio, they weren't sure how deep the water was, so they said, "Hey, step off the boat," and he did. And when it didn't go up beyond his waist, they knew that they could get other guys off the boat as well. But we were sending people who were physically intimidating on the battlefield simply because they came from a beef-fed diet.
Absolutely, and I think it's really important to look at what some of the health issues we have with our young people today, and young ladies are found to be anemic in many cases. That's been an ongoing issue, and beef's a great source of iron, readily available. I was in Japan in March on a U.S. Meat Export Federation trade mission, And it was very interesting to learn that as that population in Japan ages, their government is actually encouraging their people to eat more red meat to improve their uh, iron levels in their blood, their protein, and they feel like that's a good investment for future healthcare issues that they will have with their elderly population. So I think science is very supportive of meat in the diet, and again, I think rather than trying to blend 12 different plant things together to come up with it, we prefer just to feed it to a cow and let her do all the work for
Plus,
us.
you'd have to go all the way to Portland to find a store that sells that stuff.
Yeah.
It's 9:46, and we have a caller with us. Caller, you're on the air on KLIX. Go ahead.
Yes. Good morning, Bill. The proven fact that the folks' longevity is increased, but there's some folks that really extend it 100, 105, 110, so on and so forth, 90s. None of them are vegetarians. There's not a one, and you can look it up. Hey, I appreciate it. Have a good day.
I was going to say, I know a lot of vegetarians. They look thin, and they, but the ones that I know who really practice it in almost in a religious like manner, they're not necessarily the most muscular people you're seeing. Not that that is a requirement in life for a long life, but I just sometimes, and they may be healthy, they just don't look it to me when I see them.
Right, and again, I think anybody could cobble together a diet if that's all they wanted to spend their time doing. And I think that's, as you look back and civilization as a whole, as we've been able to improve the quality of the diet and the efficiency of producing it, then people can go about and do things that they're particularly skilled at and build and create and do great things. And again, I think I kind of go back to the young people. We need to be very careful about not imposing this idealistic, some crazy idea of a vegan diet on a kid that needs all the iron and protein and zinc and protein that they can to grow up healthy and strong and be able to learn and grow.
And we were talking about the size of the troops we used to send overseas. And when I was when I was a boy, I remember one of my grandmothers, when you went to her house, there was usually beef, at least in one meal every day, on the table. And she'd do a roast maybe on Sunday, and then there'd be other different cuts during the course of the week. And my dad was about 6.5 feet tall and almost as wide across the shoulders. And I kid you not, I one time saw him. He was a little frustrated because we were driving with a friend who had a flat, and it was 10 degrees outside, and for some reason the friend couldn't find the jack. In just in a moment of just brute strength, I saw my dad grab the back bumper of that LTD and lift high enough where that tire briefly came up off the ground. Now, that was a guy who was fed on beef. That was an amazing feat of strength that he had. And it may have been a little adrenaline going on there too in that situation, which is possible. But if you looked across the families at the time, I mean, he was not unusual. And my grandfather, who wasn't nearly as tall, was tremendously wide across the shoulders from also growing up on a diet with a lot of beef. And you could make all sorts of arguments that maybe that they had other health issues because of lifestyle. My grandfather, the only thing I remember about him really well is when I think about him, I can still smell the cigar smoke. So if you're constantly smoking a cigar, that may be the issue and not necessarily the beef.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're seeing a lot of our beef ninja warrior, Lance Picas from Salmon. He's uh, has done fantastic in that program and eats beef and works hard on the ranch. And I think that's probably as healthy a lifestyle as you could ask for. And I think it would certainly be a benefit to the whole conversation if we could talk a little more scientifically rather than this emotion of whether chicken needs to be free range or not.
Well, and again, a lot of this, the volume of beef that Americans eat, it probably varies in different parts of the country and through different generations, and various trends come along. And people will say, well, we don't go out and eat as many burgers. I don't know about that, because every time I turn around, there's a new gourmet type of burger stand that's opening up. And with that, I drive down certain highways and I say, okay, that's new, that's new, that's new. And the parking lots are always filled. They're not sitting there eating salads every day when they go in. They're going in because they like the taste of that beef. And part of this is too, I think it's what you put on what you're eating. Just a steak itself. But if you were to, there are certain things, if you were to throw a lot of it on there, it probably would make it a little less healthy, I suppose. But just the steak itself, low in calories, and you get, what do they call it, satiation when you actually eat beef.
Yeah.
So you're not hungry half an hour later, let's say, when you're eating something else.
Yeah, and it's dense protein, dense nutrients. So you are getting a lot of bang for your buck. So if you can keep track of how many calories you're consuming in a day, what you're getting, as long as beef's part of that diet, those calories provide your body with the nutrients and so forth that your body needs. And I think, I really think people are getting smarter about it. I think there's more, more stuff gets thrown out in the news, but I think we've seen demand in the beef industry bottom in the 80s, and it's climbed pretty steady since then, holding the economic Great Recession and all that thing constant. But I think people really understand they're getting a good value for their dollar, and that there are varieties of ways to prepare it. And if you want a very low-fat diet, there's I think 26 cuts of beef that fit into the American Heart Association's heart healthy diet. So there's certainly something for everybody.
Yeah, when I hear people say eat less red meat, I think they're talking primarily about fatty cuts they might have gotten 30 years ago, or it just, and that comes down to a consumer decision. If I go into the store, for instance, and I'm looking at ground beef, I have different choices I can make. I can get 70 or 80% or 90%. I can different cases of lean. But I got to admit, sometimes the 80%, that there's a little more flavor sometimes with a little extra fat in there too. And if you want people to eat it, sometimes they want a little flavor with their diet as well. But once again, there's a certain limit of that you need every day too. People that I've met who have a fat-free diet sometimes have other health issues that come along.
Absolutely. And there, the cholesterol issue was demonized in the 80s, and they've since seen that cholesterol in the diet helps with brain development and maintaining brain cognitive function. And so I think, the first story isn't always the complete story, and I think that's what, as a self-funded promotion and research board, the Idaho Beef Council's really helped to provide dollars for research on health issues and how beef can be included in a healthy diet. And there's reams of information. Anybody interested can go to beefitswhatsfordinner.com and look at health issues, sustainability issues, recipe ideas, the whole gamut for the beef industry.
Now, you mentioned, of course, in what you do with the council is, some people think lobbyist is a dirty word, but a lot of lobbying that takes place is actually pretty good stuff, because when you've got a part-time legislature, you need somebody there to sort of tell them sometimes what's going on, because they don't have time with their other jobs to research everything. And we should point out that what you do is it's a constant vigilance when it comes to dealing with people legislatively. Even in Idaho, I suppose, where you have a lot more of a friendly government than, let's say, you would have in Washington State.
Yeah, so for clarification, there's sort of two arms of the beef industry. The Idaho Beef Council, which I'm vice chair now, is a checkoff program. So none of those dollars can go for lobbying or promotion of policy. The voluntary organization, Idaho Cattle Association, does that arm of it. What we do is there's a $1.50 checkoff on every beef animal sold in the state of Idaho. Part of that money goes to the federal National Cattlemen's Beef Board for promotion research in beef, and then and part of it stays right here in Idaho to do research at the University of Idaho to promote beef within the state and to tell the message of what great stewards and families that we have producing beef in Idaho.
We've got about a minute and a half to go. I'm going to try to squeeze one caller in very quickly. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX. Go ahead.
Hi, there was a famous basketball player that went into our military academy, and a lot of these guys go into the military academy with a new diet they grow.
Yeah, I bet that's true. With military academies, that's like going to a football training table. There's a lot of beef on those tables. You know, they stick with a high protein diet.
Yeah, just it creates better bodies, stronger, and again the cognitive side of it as well.
We got to point out, even though you may not be walking the halls of the legislature, you know, trying to pin people down and say, "Oh, I want to talk about this," the work that you do though in that research, because it becomes public, helps influence a lot of decisions people make. You would hope, anyway, in government.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we want to provide information. We want to sort of be a clearinghouse of information and tell the story. As we said, there's a very small number of people actually out on the ground producing beef, and a whole lot of people that are curious about what we do, how we do it, and what kind of product we're producing for them.
Yeah, and very quickly, the caller made me think about the basketball player Bill Walton, who was a great ball player but had a short career because he kept having feet issues. And it was determined that, I was told this at one time, it was determined that his vegetarian diet had played a part in that. And if he had had a bit more protein readily available, it might have extended his playing career perhaps another decade.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a little warning in there.
And listening to Bill Walton on the play-by-play, I think maybe it impacted his cognitive function as well.
Very true.
Or it might have been the time he spent downtown San Francisco.
Yeah. Back then, though, you could keep your shoes clean.
Yeah. Hate Ashbury or whatever he says.
Bill Likely, we want to thank you for coming by today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Look forward to talking again sometime soon. And we're at 72 right now. We've got to wrap things up for the day. The Rush Limbaugh program is up next. And Bill Colley saying, God willing, and the Creektown Rise. I'll be back here tomorrow morning between 6 and 10 a.m.